In this podcast, I'm going to go over how to use Unitize. Unitize is a tool in the texture editor that when faces are selected, it will reposition the UVs to the boundary of the 0 to 1 space. Unitize works great on meshes that you'd want the texture to flow along, things like tree branches, roots, cords, elbow pipes. So with this Unitize method, we'll use the checkerboard texture and set up the UVs so that it flows along this cord. So first thing you'll want to do is assign the checkerboard texture to your surface. Under Create UVs, we'll do an auto map. And you can see from the auto map we have a lot of texture seams. This is not going to be an acceptable layout for a mesh like this. Now if we try to do a planar map, we'll do this in the Z-axis. We'll have a lot less seams, just one at the top and the bottom. I'm going to select my Place 2D texture node and set the repeat to 3 so that the checkers are smaller and easier to see. So if you notice, the checkerboard is running up and down along this mesh instead of flowing with the curves. This is one of those times that you would want to use Unitize. So we'll select all of the faces. Under Polygons, click on Unitize. So you can see what happened is every single face that was on that model has been forced into the 0 to 1 space. It's scaled out, and now on every one of those faces we'll be able to see that checkerboard. The next step is to grab all of the edges. And when you think about a cylinder, you need to choose where you want your seams. So what we'll do is deselect all of the edges that we would like to be cut into seams. So around the caps at the top and the bottom. And we'll also select an edge through the cylinder that we don't want to move and sew back together. So after doing Unitize, select all of the edges. You choose your seams by deselecting them. And then what we'll do is move and sew to create one large sheet. I'll take the shell and rotate it vertical. And we'll zoom in to take a look at the checkers. I'm going to scale this down so it's a little bit easier to see, and rotate it so that it's flowing along with the surface. Now the goal of this checkerboard texture is to make sure that everything is square. We don't want to see this stretching. So I'll grab the shell and just manually scale it, keeping an eye on the checkerboard texture, and stop when your checkers become square. The last two shells are the top and the bottom. There are some areas where the checkers are a little squashed around the tighter curves on this mesh. We can select UVs and slightly shift them to help stretch out the checkerboard. I like to select the faces on the mesh. It helps me find the UVs a bit quicker when we're dealing with a denser mesh like this. Grab the UVs and just shift them up or down, making sure that you're looking at the texture on the model as you move the UVs. Just keep shifting the UVs until the checkers are as square as you can get them.
If you're unitizing a mesh that has multiple shells to it, we want to do a layout with it This particular texture is a tiling 4-way vertically and horizontally. This texture was created in Photoshop and the seams were painted out, so it is repeatable. Having the shells scaled up like this for tiling textures are okay. We don't need to have things fit into the 0 to 1 if the texture is repeating. Having it set this way, I'm not quite sure if my texel density is going to be correct. As I unitized these, I scaled some of them larger and some of them smaller than what their neighbors are. So using a layout is the best method to make sure that all of these shells are matched up proportionately to the model. So if we come into Poly Layout, once we're finished doing the Unitize, I'll reset the settings. And the main one that we're going to want to go in and change is this Prescale. Setting Prescale to Object, Maya is going to look at the object and see how large or small it is in comparison with the rest of the model. It's then going to look at the shells and scale it proportionately so it matches. Because I rotated all of these the correct direction, I would like Maya to not rotate at 90 degrees, so I'm going to set that to none. So with Prescale to Object and Rotate to None, I'm going to click Apply, and we can frame in and see that Maya has scaled everything and fit it into the 0 to 1 space proportionately. Now, with a tiling texture that's just a small snippet like this and forcing all of the shells within the 0 to 1 space is going to cause severe pixelation of the texture because it's not meant to be looked at as just this. If you go to Image Range, we can up this to, let's bring the minimums to -2, and we'll bring the positives up to 2 and hit Apply. Even though by default you don't see this happening, the texture that sits in the 0 to 1 space repeats and repeats infinitely in this space. So what we can do is grab all of the shells now that they're all scaled proportionately, and we can scale them up. Scaling them up is going to reduce the size of the texture on the model. So we'll stop scaling when the bark looks about proportionate to the size of the model. Once this is scaled up, we should be good to go. The texel density is set because of the layout. The bark texture is flowing along with each one of these roots because we use the Unitize. Delete history, freeze transforms, and we should be good to go.